Rising number of service delivery protests as elections loom large. Protests are springing up all over the country as communities vent their anger over service delivery. But another disturbing trend has the country's newsrooms concerned as news crews become soft targets. Just a few days ago, SABC reporters Alex Bekkersdal and Mahlatse safety were threatened in Alexandra and Bekkersdal respectively. Komane and cameraman Herbert Memela were threatened with being set alight during a service delivery protest after the reporter's cell phone was stolen while Mahlatse was disrupted by a local thug during a live crossing in Alexandra. Komane and Mahlatse join us now in studio to talk about the safety of journalists and their experiences recently. Welcome to both of you. We sit here in the studio and cross to you live in from the safety of a studio, and we don't know what you're going through out there. Mahlatse?
Unpredictable stuff indeed, but of course, I mean, when you get out of the office trying to go and do your job out there, these are unforeseen circumstances. We don't go out there knowing that these things will happen. But I have to mention that, I mean, these incidents have been happening in the past few years, and I think those staff have actually prepared some of us to be able to contain this kind of situations and keep on doing the job. Because if you recall, during that incident, as you can see on the screen, the gentleman, of course, had been handling me and choking me while I'm trying to speak. And ironically, I'm saying the situation is calm in Alex, but looking at that, it's definitely not calm. But he was the only one there in Alex who appeared not to be calm, of course, at that point. But I mean, we're trying to bring news to the audience. We're trying to bring news to the
citizens.
To the viewers.
Need to know what's happening.
The citizens need to know what's happening. Unfortunately, these are some of the stuff that we experience on the ground.
Your phone was stolen in Bekkersdal. Tell us about the story.
Well, it was stolen and I had to buy it back from the thieves. It's very unfortunate.
So it wasn't stolen, it was taken?
It was taken, and they obviously knew who they were taking it from. So the minute we realized it was taken, we then went to the police station to open up the case.
What do you mean you realized it was taken? Did they take it from you? Did they?
No. So it was, we obviously travel with vehicles, so it was in the car.
Oh.
I had been driving because normally what we would then do, if you recall in Bekkersdal, there was, an altercation between the police and the residents there. So we then decided with the cameraman Herbert that I would do the driving and he would then give him an opportunity to run in and out of the car as the situation changes. We have to use those type of, you have to think on your feet.
Look at that footage on the screen.
Yes.
Chairs being stolen from offices.
Yes.
Do you think that sometimes criminal elements sneak into these protests and overtake what communities are trying to highlight?
Well, it's very unfortunate. To a certain extent, yes, I would believe that certain thuggery and criminal elements do creep up at these protests. But I think one thing that I have to mention, and I wouldn't have done the story justice if I don't mention that, it's very concerning that these people that we know, I especially in Bekkersdal, it was young people that are involved in these protests that have these altercations with police. I mean, that speaks to the issue, the economic circumstances that people find themselves in. I had to pay 110 rand back to buy my phone back from the very same people that they stole it. For them, it's a loaf of bread, whatever it may be. I think people don't take into consideration that it's a crime. You cannot be stealing from people.
How did that feel for you? Were you conflicted that you had to buy it back, or did you feel sympathy towards them?
There were times in that when this happened that I was really scared. I was scared for my life. Like you read earlier on that, I mean, people would come in and say, Mabashiso, as in let them be burnt, let them be burnt. So you don't know.
They said that about you?
Yes, myself and the camera person, that we need to be burnt. And we were given a warning that next time it's going to be the car, it's not just going to be the phone. So, it's those type of things that we find ourselves having to go through at these stories.
We're conducting a parallel conversation. I don't know if we should be crossing over to Blaine yet, who's going to be having a conversation with SANEF. Maybe our producers can give me an indication. Should I be crossing over to Blaine? Not at this moment. Okay, we're going to continue with Mahlatse and Mahlatse. You have been on the ground, and there's this going conversation about whether it's political or whether there's genuine concerns. What is your sense?
Well, I mean, in the story, in the sense of the story that I've been covering in Alex, of course, I mean, when the protests started, then there were rumors that obviously these protests are actually hijacked by politicians simply because what councillors from Alex were part of it. But, well, I mean, the ANC, we know that they've been pouring cold water on those allegations. On the other side, DA saying that clearly this is ANC trying to collapse the current administration, seat of Johannesburg. Again, ANC coming back to say DA is clearly running out of ideas. And remember, DA-led Premier-elect Solomon Simanga did open a criminal case against ANC last Sunday, I think. And I think that's, you know, some political debate is there during this protest, and more especially because we are in the election year and we are likely to hear more of this attachment of politics in this particular protest over and over again, even post-elections.
What was your sense in Bekkersdal, Mahlako?
You know, we obviously know in any project that comes into any township, there must be a certain level of local people being employed. We got the sense that there's an element of stomach politics that is obviously involved here. You know, greed is really such a big factor in politics.
Which makes the grievances authentic.
Which make the grievances authentic. But there are certain times where you start feeling like, you know, there's underlying issues that are taking place here. You know, there are people that have invested, they haven't invested out in the outcome. They're highly invested in the outcome of what would happen at the service delivery protest, because you, for example, at Bekkersdal, they were instructed to, the leadership of that protest particularly was meeting with management, the executive of the municipality. It then just erupted and became violent, while they were then promised that we will give you an answer. But then suddenly, I mean, people were taking iron sheets off the roofs and using that as shields for rubber bullets against the police. They were destructing the very same infrastructure that they then would need as a community to have. You saw the chairs being stolen. They were looting. Then elements of looting also come in. You know, people will say, "I we're hungry. We must take this," as though it's normal. I mean, I saw a child that was no older than 10 years old on a fence, on a government building, on a fence doing this. He's taking it off. And I'm like thinking, are we teaching the children that young that this is the behavior that is normal, it's okay, it's acceptable, this is how you get heard? And
I think that's concerning. You recall Westbury, when our colleague was covering the same protest. I mean, kids as well involved in throwing stones at police. The same applies with Alex. There were kids that were burning tires in the road, and I think that's a huge concern.
I think at this moment, let's bring in the SANEF perspective with the chairperson of SANEF, Mahlatse. Blaine?
Yeah, let's bring in SANEF Chairperson Mahlatse Mahlase, who joins us now via Skype. Mahlatse, thank you very much indeed for your time. I'm not sure if you heard our colleagues describing some of the scenes that they had to go through, some of the efforts that they experienced in trying to bring the public the story. It is election time. Journalists are covering protests. There's a risk of being harassed, and not only harassed, but also maybe attacked. How can journalists mitigate these risks?
Good morning. Thank you very much for having us. We are growing, we are actually quite concerned. We know that we saw in 2016, towards the 2016 election, we saw this spike of protests. And with that spike of protests, then we saw the attack on reporters. And it is quite important that reporters are very much aware of this and aware of the circumstances and the areas that they're actually covering. Because what we are seeing now is that a lot of these protests will start off as genuine service delivery protests, are being hijacked by criminals, and then we start seeing people looting. We saw yesterday a church being attacked. And because reporters are there filming these incidences and reporting on them, then you see that the members of the public that are looting, that are stealing, then turn on the reporters to try and delete the material on their phones, so that they are not actually seen, because if the police actually do their work, these kind of images can lead to prosecution of those involved. So we're just saying to reporters that this is the time to be extra careful. No story is actually worth your life. It is important that you remain very aware of the circumstances around you. When things get heated, the best thing to do is stay behind the police line. In terms of our SANEF website, we basically had a whole tutorial around safety of journalists, and we are encouraging reporters across the country to actually go to that website and watch the tutorial, because these could be live saving tips for them.
Yeah. You said that no story is worth your life, but do editors take the level of risk to heart? Do they weigh up the risks in comparison to the editorial gain and the level of danger, or is it all about getting the story?
It can never just be about getting the story. I think as the media, we exercise with caution all the time when we send out reporters. But what we are trying to do is to ensure that the South African story is told to the public. And that's why we keep saying that, it's not only for reporters and the editors to be careful, but we need the public to also come on our side and actually be the ones that defend reporters on the ground. As I say, some of these things are genuine protests that get hijacked by criminals, and we want those members of community to be the ones that protect reporters. We have seen incidences in the past where communities have rallied behind reporters and have actually been the ones that protect them, because they realize that without the reporters, their stories would not be told. Having said that, I think it is also important for editors to continue to actually check in on reporters and continue to say to the reporters, no story is worth your life. Your safety is number one. We don't want to be telling a story around the reporter instead of actually the process. But also, what we are urging editors to do is to ensure that there is a proper debriefing session. Because a lot of the time, when during the violent process, our reporters see a lot. We've had incidences in the past month, for example, where in schools, children are stabbed and killed, and reporters are reporting on them. We see incidences where children are injured in some of these protests, and reporters are also human beings. And part of what we're encouraging editors to ensure they do is to debrief the reporters and ensure that they also get the necessary counseling.
Yeah. I mean, you speak about some of the things that journalists go through in order to get the story. We exposed to gruesome images, graphic details. We cover from theft, crime to death. What sort of long-term trauma do journalists go through in this regard?
There is long-term trauma. I think for a long time, reporters, when they're in the moment, are driven in fiction, the passion to tell the story, to go beyond everything just to make sure that the story is told. But one of the things that I was told when I came back from an area like Haiti, when the company insisted that I actually get counseling, was that why it's important to get counseling is that it might not affect you now, but you might see the repercussions of it much later in life. So part of why we are seeing and encouraging editors to ensure that reporters do go to debriefing sessions and go to counseling is just to ensure that they see the signs. Because trauma might not hit you immediately, but it might be something that comes up much later in life, and it's triggered even by something smaller. So that's why it's important that companies invest in their reporters and ensure that they get the necessary counseling. Reporters go beyond the call of duty to tell the story. They see really horrific things, and those things stay with you. You can push them back to the back of your mind for a while, but at some point they will come back. And there is now that realization that it is important for reporters to actually get professional counseling and to get help, and it is not a sign of weakness, because sometimes reporters dismiss some of these things as, it's part and parcel of doing the job, but they do check up with you. So we need reporters to be aware of this and also go for the counseling, but also companies to make the space and the time and ensure that reporters are debriefed and are actually counseled.
Yeah, Mahlatse, what's your advice to journalists who are on the field and they verbally abused?
I always say that what is important for you as the reporter at the time, you are the only person who's in that situation, and situations can be very different. Sometimes it's okay to just walk away because things escalate very quickly, and before you know it, you're in even deeper problems. It is wrong. It is unacceptable, and as a society of South Africans, we have to continue to condemn it, and we have to see other parts of civil society coming on board and speaking out against the attack of reporters, against people that are preventing reporters from doing the work that they're supposed to be doing. I saw this week what happened to the SABC reporter when that person came on during live television, and a lot of people saw it as a joke. And it was actually quite disheartening, and it had to be a conversation that happens on social media to all the time say, this is unacceptable. We cannot allow for people to be verbally assaulting journalists, to be interfering in the work of reporters, because this goes to against what we believe in, which is the freedom of the media. And the journalists must always be able to do their work. It starts off small, it soon escalates, and we should worry as South Africans when incidents like this happen.
Mahlatse, thank you very much indeed for your time as well as your insight. That was the SANEF chairperson there. And Desiree, I guess, the CPJ advises that journalists shouldn't engage with the crowd, and to remember that they are professionals, the journalists are professionals, even if the crowd is not.
The CPJ there referring to the community to protect journalists, but we're finalizing our conversation with Mahlako Komane and Mahaketla Mutlabe. Having experienced what you have, has it weakened or strengthened your resolve to go out there and make sure that citizens know about what's happening?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, we feel that there is a lot of community members that are doing their best to protect journalists, because they know that we are out there to tell their story. We are out there to give out or to paint a picture of what they are going through, to paint a picture of their plight. And we really appreciate that particular support. But of course, here and there will be those who are actually taking a different side against journalists because they've got different views, which are allowed in the country, in a constitutional country. But of course, I think harassing journalists should really stop.
And actually, I've just remembered one important thing that you raised in one of our crossings, is that the guy who was harassing you was actually arrested later on for mugging someone.
No, in fact, what happened is that, yes, he was intoxicated. I don't know from what, but he was high on something. What happened is that after we took the crossing back to studio during the morning live interview, then JMPD officials came through, and then they took him away from the cameras. And then what they told us is that early that morning, he attempted to mark an elderly person on London Road, because that's where we're crossing. So I think
this is just to highlight that thuggery aspect.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think quite important as well, communities need to realize we're not the enemies here. I think, once we get that message out from communities that we really are not the enemies, we are there to tell stories, we're not biased in what we do. It would be very nice for communities to know that.
And that's an important point to end it on. Mahlako Komane, thank you so much for making the time this morning. And Mahaketla. Blaine?
Thanks, well.